It's funny, I didn't read the book, I read the script. This was the first time that Brian had adapted one of his own books as a screenplay. And and he got to be very close with Sandy Powell, my costume designer on Hugo. And so I was in post-production on Carol, and Sandy said, I think you might really find this script special, unique. It's by a good friend of mine. And I just started to read it one day in the middle of like a million things, and I was like, uh-oh, I better wait. This demands a lot of attention. Because he had already started to move it into a cinematic language with great care and great sensitivity to what film could bring to it, because it's intercut, the way the book is as well. But he really thought about film. And so when things settled down on Carol, I finally really read it through. And I was like, wow, this is pretty special. And it certainly got my kind of cinematic juices flowing when I read it. Then I read his beautiful book, you know, that's half illustrations and half text. But like I said, he'd already moved it toward a cinematic concept. Well, very much as you suggest, it was a film that rests on, and this is true for Hugo too, intense love and reverence for cinema history. You know, it's almost like this writer wants to come up with a justification, a narrative justification for telling a story about silent film and giving it to young people to appreciate. And you could see that's one strategy that he undertook resulted in Hugo, and then in this it was quite different. This one brings the theme of deafness onto that. And I think in one of the most astute and poignant observations that he made is the idea that for hearing people, it's not something we think about, but that when silent film ended, it created a division between the deaf world and the hearing world, and a segregation that never was restored, you know? And just how that might feel through the experience of a child who's invested in movies, and we find out why later on. It's just such a beautifully sensitive way of looking at that historical, you know, technological advancement in movies that we all revere and say, wow, yeah, sound came in, great. But it changed the medium, and it also changed a certain audience's relationship to the medium. So that was really a beautiful insight. It was Stråström, it was The Wind, which is just, oh God, just an amazing movie. I mean, we will never be able to approach what he did. I think he shot in the Mojave Desert with like massive fans that Lillian Gish never recovered from, the sand being blown in her face, but the wind becomes a body, a force, a character in the visual language of that movie, like so stunning and so strange. So we just, in our very short version, our very brief version, paid homage to that. But all the way through the film, you know, in every aspect of both the black and white and the color stories, we were, you know, inspired by movies and watching movies that were relevant to the period that we were describing. And I saw other films I'd never seen before, like The Crowd, the King Vidor film from 1928, which is a, you know, beloved film. Jean-Luc Godard adored The Crowd, and Billy Wilder homage. He lifted a whole shot from The Crowd in the apartment that we did the same thing to in the miniature section of Wonderstruck when she's working at the Museum of Natural History. We loom in on that whole grid of desks, just like they do in The Crowd and just like Billy Wilder did in the apartment. So there's a great deal of mutual love being thrown around, you know, from movie to movie in Wonderstruck. We still really are cautious about not building shots that depend too entirely on on digital and CG. There are some exceptions to that, like the dream scene of Ben, and yet the images of the wolves chasing Ben in the dream scene at the beginning of the movie, those were shot on a still camera at the Museum of Natural History, at the diorama, where we just move the camera around as if the camera was moving, and because obviously the wolves are static, and it created this strange, disturbing effect. And so we modeled our CG dreams of Ben running after that very crude sort of and effective bit of film. But yeah, for the most part, it's about finding the locations that get the closest to what you're looking for, dressing them as much as you can for your budget, peopling them with the best background. And I have to say, there's some scenes in Wonderstruck where the background players, particularly in the 70s, are so thoroughly depicted that it looks like you're watching a piece of archival footage that we just put our little boy into. But, and then, so yeah, we just try not to depend on the CG. And then the CG becomes like that just little bit of deep space where you see the end of the avenue turning into Manhattan, but we actually were shooting in Brooklyn or whatever the case. It was Carter's incredible work, obviously, and it was a discussion that preceded shooting the movie and followed the shooting of the movie. But I can't not give enormous credit to Afonso Gonçalves, my editor, who has an incredible ear for music, and with whom we are putting together a temp track for the film that is impossible to cut or structure a film around without it being not just serviceable, but expert. And it was, and it really helped us figure out how to manage the jigsaw puzzle of the movie, and also, but not overwhelm you. I mean, I think that the challenge in a film like this is sort of too much of everything. Too much music, too much, cute kids being cute or something. Like you had to temper the story, and also too much wonder, too many scenes of beautiful discovery. It also had to be tamped down, and there may be some audiences who are like, it's too much of that for them, but it comes out of this specific imagination that you have to fulfill, but it's still a balancing act the whole way through. So I relied on my great team to help us find the balance.
¿Por qué sabe mi nombre?